When you look at the most popular TV shows of the 90s, you notice that all of them have one specific thing in common. They are all made in a way where each episode is its own self-contained story, which is commonly known as episodic storytelling. But when you look at the most popular shows made in the past year, they flip that and follow what is known as serialized storytelling, where each episode is a small part of a larger narrative. So what has changed in the past 30 years that has caused the entire world to ditch episodic storytelling and start serializing everything? And more importantly, is this a shift for the better or for the worse? To understand why episodic storytelling is dying out, we have to look at how people consumed media over 30 years ago and how we consume it now. Because if you wanted to watch a TV show in the 90s, you would have to quite literally wait for it to be broadcasted on the TV. And if you couldn't be there, you would set your VCR to record the episode when it airs, and only then could you watch it. So back in the day, television, especially TV shows, wasn't something that you could pick up at any moment. It was something that you got to occasionally enjoy, and if you were following a particular series, you had to turn it into what was usually a weekly ritual. And when we look at the landscape today, it has essentially gone upside down, because if you want to watch a show nowadays, you simply find whatever platform it is available on, and after buying a monthly subscription, you have access to every episode of the show on every device that you have. The only time you have to wait for an episode or season is when you have binged the whole series in a week, and you have to anxiously wait 2 years for the next week of entertainment. So when we look at these two worlds, it is clear that the very format and manner in which we consume media has fundamentally changed. And if the format changes, so does the structure of the story, and in this case, both ways of engaging with television perfectly represent the type of storytelling that we get. Since in the 90s and 2000s, a lot of people would just switch between channels and watch whatever seemed interesting enough to pass the time. Maybe they had some favorites, but if a TV show really wanted to stand out, it had to be able to hook people with any episode, and that's why episodic storytelling was so popular, since you could watch the 11th episode of the 5th season and be as entertained as you would have been had you seen the previous 5 seasons and 10 episodes. Whereas today, that simply isn't the case, since what really sells a TV show is how easy it is to watch the next episode, which is what is commonly referred to as binging, where people continuously watch several episodes of a TV show, usually repeating this pattern until finishing the entire series. Therefore, what really matters today is the binge factor of a show, and not so much the value of each individual episode. Binge-worthiness is something that now directly ties into people's willingness to watch and engage in a particular series. Because when you watch an episodic show like The X-Files, you are much more likely to finish the episode and not really have a need to watch the next one, unless you have absolutely nothing else to do. So while you might easily get hooked on one episode while being in the room, once that episode is resolved and the story arc runs its course, you don't have a strong reason to watch the next one. So in the context of modern streaming services, an episodic TV series will likely perform very differently to a serialized one, since people might watch and really enjoy the first episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, but they might forget about it, and then later on get hooked on Stranger Things. Therefore, the reason for the decline of episodic storytelling isn't that it is flawed, but rather that it is a format that doesn't provide the same value to creators as it once did, since the only reason it was once dominant is because it was the only one that earned more. This is not to say that serialized TV shows were unable to succeed, since, as I mentioned before, people could still record episodes and continuously tune into them. Therefore, shows like Twin Peaks or The Sopranos were still able to become insanely huge hits. So the question remains, is this shift from episodic to serialized storytelling objectively good or bad? And the answer is that it is a bad thing, to the extent that stories which should be episodic become serialized, or are not told at all. Since as much as it would be nice to criticize serialized storytelling as just another symptom of people having shorter attention spans, it is impossible to deny the fact that some of the best shows, and by extension, stories in human history, are serialized. And actually, many people would argue that episodic storytelling is the weaker one, since it doesn't really allow us to explore longer, more complex narratives, like the one Walter White goes through, where throughout the span of 5 seasons, we get to see him devolve from a healthy family man to a crazed, lonely lunatic, which you couldn't, for example, experience in the episodic format of Star Trek the original series. And while that is technically true, I would argue that it is the exact opposite, since the very premise of episodic storytelling is that each episode is its own story, meaning that in each episode, you get a totally unique and fresh point of view. This actually allows the writers to expand on a wider range of characters and connect the audience to them in a way that provides the most objective and nuanced perspective. And to prove that, we just have to look at the characters of Star Trek The Next Generation. definition. Because if I was to ask you, who is the main character of Star Trek TNG, you would probably say that it is Jean-Luc Picard. But if he is indeed the main character, why are there so many episodes where the captain of the ship is on the sidelines and the focus is on side characters like Data, Wesley Crusher, Beverly Crusher, Worf, Counselor Troy, and even an unsociable background character like Lieutenant Barclay? And this is a little bit of a niche example, but this theme of exploring an enormous amount of perspectives is one that applies to every episodic story. Even ones like House MD or The X-Files, where we technically follow one main character, but in each episode that character still goes through something new that teaches us something we didn't know about them before. Therefore, episodic television actually provides more room for developing the characters and the world around them. Since while you could theoretically turn an episode of The X-Files into a whole season and make it more appealing for today's audience, you would absolutely lose an enormous amount of world building and character development, since the narrative could only be expanded in that one direction, therefore giving us, the audience, a more narrow view. Personally, I love both formats, since each of them have their own pros and cons. While binging is not the best practice, it is still something that allows you to truly lose yourself in a story. And I don't think that this is the last we will see of episodic storytelling, since it is a very unique and fulfilling way of not only enjoying, but more importantly creating TV shows and their worlds. However, while making this video, I noticed that there is one genre which is fundamentally episodic, yet still retains the binge factor of a serialized show. And that is the sitcom genre. Yes, it sounds weird, but sitcoms are the one exception, where you can finish an episode and still be drawn in to watch the next one. Essentially the only episodic format that you can truly binge. This is because when we watch shows like Star Trek, The Next Generation, or The X-Files, each episode is roughly 40 to 50 minutes long and provides a movie-level narrative that takes you through a wide range of emotions and thoughts, as opposed to sitcoms where each episode is roughly 20 minutes long and provides you with a pretty lighthearted experience, hence not giving you that same emotional depth and making you feel like you haven't spent enough time watching the sitcom. And this is because they are not all that emotionally taxing, therefore they don't need to end the episode on a cliffhanger that forces you to watch the next one. And in the end, I do really hope that we get to see a real return to episodic storytelling, since it is a format that is not necessary for a deep or meaningful show, but without it, the landscape of television becomes much more bland, since it is not just an abundance of great books, films, and TV shows that makes entertainment great, but rather the diversity of the stories they tell. Since an episodic TV show can become a part of your life, it is a format that you can adopt into your routine, maybe with breakfast or dinner, but whenever or wherever you watch it, it will be an experience that marks that piece of time with fond memories. And I think that it is that kind of simple magic that the world needs the most. If you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comment section down below. I would love to hear what you think about this topic, or maybe you have unanswered questions or suggestions. In any case, check out the channel for more in-depth videos like this. Live long and prosper.